Well, greetings everyone. Welcome back. I'm sorry it's taken me a while to get another episode up. The weather has not been cooperating and I've been pretty busy with work and family stuff, but I have gotten a few good days of weather and a little bit of a time break, so let's get right back at it. In this episode, I'm going to start the process of applying fairing compound to all of the cracks and holes in the deck and get those filled in. I'm going to raise the mast on my own for the first time. I'm going to start working on the woodwork, finish tearing out the old electrical system, and start applying the fairing compound. On days where the weather was reasonably cooperative but still wasn't warm enough to apply fairing compound, I decided to get in there and continue tearing out the electrical system. Now, after having completed routing out all of the spider cracks and holes in the deck, I'm ready to start putting some fairing compound in and sealing the whole thing up. Now, before I do that, just to make my job a little easier, I'm going to raise the mast. One of the reasons I got this boat is that I needed something where I could rig the entire thing by myself. So a process that used to take at least an hour and 3 people, which were hard to come by sometimes, now took a whole, 30 seconds? I like this boat. Sorry about the view. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be using Total Boat's Total Fair Fairing Compound. It's a 2-part epoxy filler, and it's got a very good reputation, lots of good reviews on the internet, and I've had good luck with Total Boat products before, and I was able to find the lowest price from Atlantic Boat Supply for just a shade over $60 after tax and title. The shipping was prompt and I got it within a couple of days, so you might want to check them out if you're looking for this product. Now, there are lots of other reviews and instructions on YouTube on how to use this product, so I'm not going to go into it in depth. Basically, you have a 2-part epoxy filler, one of which is blue, one of which is yellow. So you simply take a scoop of the blue and a same size scoop of the yellow and mix it together. Just mix it up with a putty knife. It takes a couple of minutes to do this, and you'll know you're done when everything is green, with no more streaks or spots of yellow or blue. The next thing I want to do is clean out the holes and the spider cracks full of any debris and dust. Now, acetone works alright on this, but I have found that it will dissolve the plastic and smooth things out a little bit. And I like to keep the surface a little bit rough to have a more mechanical bond for this stuff to grab onto. So I use an air compressor. It gets out all the dust and dirt and all the debris and keeps the rough surface that acetone tends to smooth over a little bit. You just take a fair amount of it and push it into the hole. Occasionally you'll get that dimple that pops up in a hole, and you just stop with the putty knife and push it backwards and then down for a second. And I don't have a problem afterwards of applying some more over the top to smooth out the entire surface around the areas that I'm applying. Remember, this isn't just a hole filler, it's fairing compound, which means irregularities in the deck due to weathering and corrosion or whatever else has been caused by it can be smoothed out in the sanding process. So I apply a little bit more than I know that I'm going to need just to create a new surface. It's easier than to just sand the whole thing down to where it should be and get a nice smooth result that looks like the original deck shape. Even places like this where the traveler goes into the deck in the stern, I'm not necessarily filling in that hole, but I do need to fill in the spider cracks and reinforce it. So I'm going to put a fair amount in there and just slowly glide it over to build up a nice layer on top that I can sand off later. I am going to be reinforcing this area of the deck from underneath because it's clear that it's taken quite a bit of stress and it needs to be reinforced. As for the cracks, just push it in, smear it around every direction so that it gets in every way you can possibly think of. Smooth it off, and don't be afraid to add just a little bit more to the top so that when you sand it, you get a nice even finish that's flared out in all directions rather than just in the crack. It took me the better part of the day to get all this faired in. And you do need to do this when the air temperature is going to be at least above 50 degrees for at least 24 to 48 hours. Now, miraculously, the day I did this, we had a nice little break from the winter in late February, where the weather got above 65 degrees for about 2 or 3 days. The day I applied this, it topped 70. I'll take it. I'd also mentioned in a previous episode that I wanted to fill in this hole that someone put in the back to allow ventilation for the inboard motor. Once I got the plastic fittings out of there, I smoothed it off and created a plug for it out of some scrap marine plywood. I just roughed it out on my bandsaw, which took a little longer than it should have because this band is duller than an insurance seminar and I need to replace it. Did a rough fit of it, saw where I need to clean it up a little bit, and then cleaned it up a little bit on an oscillating belt sander. This is a great tool to have for woodworkers, and if you're working on a boat, you do have to be careful. There are occasions when the belt can grab a hold of the wood and, yeah. Let's try that again. As I said, just take it slow and try and drag the wood behind it so it doesn't grab a hold of it. But occasionally yeah, okay, well, alright, that's good enough. My battery died as I was trying to complete this process, but I'm going to go into fiberglass work in a later episode in a lot more detail. There are some things you need to do when repairing holes like this in the deck to protect the core, and I'll get into that again in a later episode. After a good long hard day's work, I had pretty much everything filled in, at least with the first coat. I'm aware that there are certain places that are going to need another one. There's always a spot you forget, and there's something that needs a little bit more, but I think it's already starting to look better. Now, after a few days of letting that cure, we got another nice break in the weather, and it's time to do that thing that all boat owners just love to do. I prefer to use a random orbital sander on these. I started out using some 80 grit sandpaper, and I'll go back over it again with something finer before I apply the primer to the deck. You'll notice here on the cockpit combing that the patch I applied there is pretty big compared to the small hole that I was trying to fill in. Everything that doesn't need to be there will be sanded away, giving me a really nice form as close to the original shape as possible. Once this is primed and painted, you'll never know it was there. After applying and sanding down that initial coat of fairing compound, it was time to look at the woodwork a little bit. The seat on the port side flips open to make another small sleeping area if you ever want to use this for overnight camping. I decided to take it off and work on it indoors since the next couple of weeks didn't look terribly good for weather, and I wanted to get some progress on the wood. As I did so, I found out that the core underneath the fiberglass seats underneath the wood is completely shot. So that's one of those unexpected problems you need to expect. Stuff like that always comes up, and really it doesn't look like a hard repair, although I'm not entirely certain how I'm going to fix this yet. But I decided, looking at the other woodwork, which was in pretty rough shape, it was beginning to split at the ends, and trying to sand something in corners like that was going to be difficult if I really wanted to repair it correctly. Taking off the corroded screws that were holding that to the bottom, I gently pried it up as best I could and saw that, especially on the starboard side near the front of the seat, there was quite a bit of rot. Considering that teak is about $125,000 per board foot, I want to see if I can repair and salvage this wood as best I can for the seats. I've got all the woodwork I can off the boat, and I'm going to start off looking at these gaff jaws and getting those apart. I originally didn't think I could salvage this as the wood looked pretty rotten. However, once I got it off and took a closer look at it, paints and finishes that have been applied over the years are definitely shot. The wood actually is still pretty solid. I wasn't sure what kind of wood it was as I started out. It didn't seem like it was teak, but once I sanded it off, hopefully I could figure that out. One of the biggest problems I found taking this apart were some of the materials that were used to hold it together. In several places there were stainless steel bolts that held it together, and they did fine. But the main hinge pin that ran through the center of the gaff, including that little piece in the middle that hinges back and forth, was all connected by a piece of ferrous-based thread rod. Take one guess what that did. That did not do any favors to the wood. It rusted completely, was corroded, and did a little bit of damage to the wood inside. Just a point, if it's not already clear, do not use ferrous-based metals on boats, ever. I also need to look at the finish that I'm going to start applying to these wood pieces. This is a small seat or hatch cover that goes in the very stern of the boat over the motor. As you can see, it hasn't been refinished in quite a while, so this is going to take some work to clean up. The previous owner applied a product called Cetol to the woodwork of the boat, and this is General Cetol Marine. It's got a good reputation, but I did have some concerns. Looking at the woodwork on my boat that I've taken off, you can clearly see areas where he's applied this product, but it has a cloudy, milky look to it. You can't see the wood very clearly, and it almost looks like thinned out paint. I really don't like the look of that, and I'm looking for something that's going to protect the wood as well as show it off a little bit. Now, I've taken this around to several people to try and figure out what happened. Some say it was probably applied when there was too much moisture or dew in the air, but for the teak on the boat, the manufacturer recommends the Cetol Natural Teak product. I can't really tell that there's that much of a difference between them except for the color. The composition seems to be the same. And when I opened them up, I was still a little skeptical because they don't look like a clear varnish. It's more of a translucent, thinned out paint looking product. But with so many people speaking highly of it, I decided to give it a try and was going to do some tests on it on some scrap wood to see what it looked like. I picked mine up again off of Amazon from Wholesale Marine for around $40 after tax and title. Wholesale Marines shipped it out quickly. I received it promptly, so again, you might want to check them out for seeing if you can get a good deal on that as well. For some of the wood that wasn't in too bad a shape, I wanted to use a heat gun to start removing the paint and finishes that were already on there. There are places where heat guns can work, and there are other places where you simply need to sand it. In this case though, this wood was not in too bad a shape and it was relatively smooth, so heating it up with a heat gun and doing a light scrape on it took the product right off. You do want to be careful to keep the heat gun moving and not perpendicular to the wood, staying in one particular place, or it will scorch it. The handrails are the hardest to strip because there's absolutely no flat surface on them except for the underside, so this is a place where a heat gun can come in pretty handy. Just apply it until it begins to bubble, a light scrape takes it right off. I will need to do a little bit of sanding on these though to smooth them out. Starting to work on the gaff jaw, there were several layers of paint and possibly primer on here that were very difficult to get off. So I used my random orbital sander for a while, but then went back to use my oscillating belt sander, being very careful to keep the part moving at all times, as belt sanders obviously take off an enormous amount of material very quickly. I didn't want to damage it or take too much off. After I got it pretty effectively sanded, I could clearly see that the gaff jaws on this boat were made of white oak. It seems to be in pretty good shape after I got some of the paint and stains off of it, and I'm going to do my best to use this again. The teak seats were another situation altogether. I tried to use the heat gun on the seats, but the grain is so roughed up from being exposed to the weather that it just wasn't working, and there was no other way to do it other than to sand it. With the hard wood and this finish, the best way to do this was a belt sander, which I kept moving at all times and ultimately did a really nice job of cleaning them up. Getting this wood smooth will help roll and tip it into a really nice finish. It shouldn't hold too much moisture, which hopefully will help protect it more. And I started working on the companionway doors. These are pretty tricky because, again, they're weathered very much on the outside, but they have the raised panels on the inside, which makes it very difficult. I started off by using a heat gun and a sharp chisel to take out the finish in the raised panel area, and then a lot of hand sanding with a small flexible foam sanding block. They are just about ready for a finish to be applied to them. The seats, on the other hand, I'm going to wait until I reinstall to put the finish on those because they're probably going to require some fasteners and thus some wooden plugs to hold them down, and I want to do all that at one time. But it was time to do some testing on this. This is a scrap piece of teak that I had, and I'm not applying it under ideal circumstances. They recommend one last sanding with about a 220 grit sandpaper and applying it with a natural hair brush. This I just applied after using some 80 grit sandpaper, and all I had at the moment was a foam brush. But that should be enough to tell me whether this finish is going to give me a nice warm clear look to the wood, or it's going to give me that cloudy looking finish that I really don't care for. And after applying it and letting it dry for a while and coming back, I can clearly see that it looks pretty sharp. It's showing the grain nicely. It went on very easily even with the foam brush. So I think I'm going to stick with the Cetol Natural Teak product, and I'll get into it in a later episode on how to apply this, and we'll see how it turns out. Also in the next episode, I'm going to go over making the mast hoops. I'll make my own steamer box, as well as a form to make the mast hoops. Whatever else time and weather permit, I will include in the next video. Leave a comment or question below if you like. I'll get back to it as soon as I can, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.